in Anglo-America are losing people, and roughly half are gaining. So we're seeing a split inflation paradigm between these. The New Yorks and the Torontos and the Montreals lose, the Vancouvers, the Winnipegs, and the Austin, Texases gain. Fifth, energy. Circle in the middle, that's where all of our energy comes from. If you take that wedge out of the Pac-Man, that is all the stuff that is carbon free. If you take the Pac-Man itself and go left, that's everything that has carbon in some way. It's a demand graphic. Now, about a decade ago, a narrative took hold that fossil fuels of all types were on their way out, so why would you invest in any of them? So right now, globally, we are investing more in this chunk of our power system. I'm sorry, not our power system, our energy system, than we are in this chunk. So 6% of total demand is getting more investment dollars than 83% of global demand. And this mismatch has generated insufficient energy production in much of the world. And so a lot of the energy crunch that you're hearing about, not just in North America, but especially in Europe and Asia, is because of this investment mismatch. Now, it obviously has a bigger impact in places like Europe and Asia, where the energy is produced on a different continent from where it's consumed, but the story pretty much holds everywhere. If your goal is a rapid transition to an equivalent technology, some version of this does make sense. But green tech is not an equivalent performing technology, and it all has to do with geography. This map shows where the sun shines a lot. Any place in red, the solar intensity is so high and so reliable that you can generate a lot of green tech from solar without too much of a cost. You move into orange, and then the case isn't there anymore. So in red, it makes economic and environmental sense to go with solar. If you move into orange, it probably doesn't make economic sense anymore. It's probably a wash. By the time you reach green, you will never generate enough electricity from your panels to pay down the carbon costs that it took to build, ship, and install them in the first place. So putting up solar in the green, you're actually contributing to the problem rather than the solution. Red good, green bad. This is solar. Same concept for wind. Red is good, green is bad. I'm now going to combine them. The areas in green are places where solar is fantastic. The places in blue is where wind is fantastic. And the places where they overlap, the darker green, that's where both of them work great. You'll notice that we've eliminated roughly 80% of the Earth's land surface. But we're not done. You don't put solar panels over a field of crops because the sun is needed. You don't put wind turbines above about 3,500 meters of elevation because the air density is so low the turbines won't turn. And you don't want to put too much generation more than 1,000 miles away from a city because you then lose so much in terms of transmission. And that takes us to this. In our enthusiasm to decarbonize, we've mismatched technologies to geographies. Now, how much this matters all depends upon where you are. The further from the equator you are, the more laughable solar becomes. And in places like the Maritimes or Ontario or New York, the very concept of sunshine is at best a mild suggestion. Wind also depends upon where you are. The Hamilton Peninsula looks great. The Great Plains, including the prairies, are some of the best wind territories on Earth. Of course, just because you have solar and wind potential doesn't mean it's going to happen, because it's also an issue of finance. Cost structure, all in, full life cycle for a combined cycle natural gas plant. And this is the single largest type of energy generating asset in Europe and North America today. The gray is the cost that comes from the fuel. This is something we understand instinctively. You build a facility, you buy the fuel as the years tick by, you sell your power in basically a subscription model. And you get the cash in at the rate you need to buy fuel. Money comes in, money goes out. That's not how green tech works. In green tech, the investment is upfront because the fuel is free. So, yes, most green tech over the life of its production cycle is now cost effective and even in some cases cheaper. But all of the cost is upfront. Now, for the last 30 years of cheap capital, when the baby boomers are socking away all their money, this has been a footnote. It doesn't matter if you prepay your power bill for 20 years. But if you fast forward to next year when the baby boomers have taken their money and gone home, and the cost of capital triples, quadruples, and more, this model is not nearly as friendly. Every single financial assessment that I have seen for the green revolution displacing fossil fuels assumes no more than maybe 100 or 200 basis point increase in financing costs. That is not going to happen. That can't happen. So we have now 10 years of insufficient investment in traditional power sources, and the cost moving forward is going to skyrocket because of financial shortages. That is what real energy inflation looks like. We haven't experienced it yet. Fifth and finally, monetary policy, everybody's favorite. Now, this is US M2. The red arrows, the first two are QE1 and QE2 during the financial crisis. The third one is the coronavirus bailout. That's the biggest financial jolt that we've ever done, 100% paid for with deficit spending. And the orange bar is what has happened under the Biden administration. Canadian M2 roughly follows the US pattern, although at an order of magnitude smaller. So honestly, it would have been too small for me to put in here, especially with what I'm about to put up. Now, I look at this, and irresponsibility is not the word that comes to mind. Remember that the US dollar liquefies all global trade. It's the primary store of value globally, and it is necessary to make the world's largest economy function. So despite all the crap that the Fed gets, I think this is pretty good. It's really only with coronavirus that we've seen a meaningful departure from the norm. This is inflationary, especially recently, but really only moderately. Compare that to Europe and Japan. Not global trade currencies, not used as widely as the dollar, generally not considered a store of value, but at a number of times, both of them have passed the USM2 in total. They constantly tweak their currency policy and their monetary policy in order to pay for certain goals, for example, the Eurozone bailouts. And before you get too hard on the Japanese and the Europeans, let me redraw this. Same data, different scale. Here are the Chinese. Chinese regularly print 2 to 5 times the amount of currency that the United States Fed does, even when there's not an economic need for it from our point of view. So is there monetary inflation in Anglo-America? Yes. But it's probably the least important of the 5 factors I've lined out. And more importantly, most